Okay, we got a real quick one here for you today. This is something that some of you may not have run into before, but I've run into it at least 5 times this year. We've had a very foggy fall. And during deer season, we had fog roll through several times, and I encountered a problem. That problem is the laser rangefinders do not work in the fog. And when I say do not work, I mean I couldn't get a range on a hillside at 150 yards. Like the maximum that they would work is about 130 yards in that particular moment. And so I was curious. I wanted to find out if that was going to persist all the time with every rangefinder or if it was only some. So it's pretty foggy out here. The visibility is not so good. Now I'm shooting this video after I did the test because obviously I needed to take advantage of the fog while it was here, and when the sun comes up it generally burns the fog off and there's not much left. So when I was doing this test, I could visibly see with my eye targets out to about 500 yards or so. And so I tested here the Vortex Fury HD 5000 AB, and then the Swarovski EL range 10 by 42, and then the Vectronics Vector 23s. So I was really curious if you could buy your way out of this problem, and it turns out you kind of can, but not really. The Vortex unit MSRP is like $2,000. The Swarovski is like $4,000, and the Vectors are like $25,000. So this is not really something that is going to be practical for most people. I shoot constantly, and so I'm shooting super small targets quite a long ways away, so I need the yardage to be exact, and that's why I have those vectors. During my testing this morning, the Vortex and the Swarovski, they could not range my 300-yard steel plates, and I've got plates out there that are like 18 inches at 300 yards. And they could not give me a reading. They would read at 200 yards, and keep in mind that my visibility with my eye was about 500 yards. And so both the Vortex and the Swarovski would range out to 200, but I couldn't hit anything beyond that, not even the ground. And it wouldn't read the ground past about 150. So it needed a very reflective target to be able to work. The Vector, on the other hand, I could ping my 300-yard plate 100% of the time, and I could sometimes get the 400-yard to read back, but not very often. Probably 1 out of 15 times or something. So the Vectronics Vector 23 was able to read back farther in the fog than any of the others, and given the gigantic disparity in price, I would certainly hope so. But this is a real problem. If you're ever out shooting in the fog, you probably should come up with some alternate way of trying to range find. Like if you're using a first focal plane scope, you should use the reticle in your rifle to try to use your range estimation skills and say, well, the animal is this tall from top to bottom, and how many mils is that? And you can do some range estimation. That formula is readily available on the internet, so I encourage you to go check that out. Now, the reason why these rangefinders aren't working is because in order to rangefind, they have to emit light. It's an invisible light. We can't see it with our eyes, but it emits a beam of light, and then it reflects that back, and the sensor inside of the unit calculates how much time it takes for that reflection to happen, and then it gives us our yardage. So the reason this is not working is because there's too much water in the air. I mean, obviously the fog represents 100% humidity, and all of that water in the air, the humidity, makes it extraordinarily difficult for this calculation to happen, because the beam of light that the rangefinder shoots out gets dispersed in this cloud. So we can visibly see the fog, but the light, it's just like if you're driving down the road and you've got your brights on. Well, the amount of reflection off of that fog is extreme to the point where you can't even see sometimes. It just completely drowns everything out. Whereas if you put your fog lights on, slightly different color, lower intensity, well, and all of a sudden you can see through that. So some of the lasers in these laser rangefinders will have a better ability to cut through the fog than others. But most of the consumer-oriented models in the sub $5,000 price point are just not going to do very well with it, and it's very obvious why. So that refraction and diffusion, it just completely demolishes the rangefinder's ability to see the light coming back off the target. Even if some light does hit the target, it just can't separate all the noise in the water vapor that the laser's hitting on the way there from all the diffracted, noisy reflection that's coming back. That's why these rangefinders do not work well in the fog. Well, that's all we have here for today, and it is freezing cold out here. It is like -2 degrees out here right now, so I'm going to wrap this up and get all my gear back inside before it freezes to death. And me.